The silence of deep space was not truly silent, especially not on the bridge of the HFY. The low hum of the engines, mixed with the soft beeping of sensors, created a constant background noise. But today, that noise was drowned out by the shouting of officers and the loud, wailing alarms. Commander James stood in the center of the chaos, his hands gripping the railing of the command deck so hard that his knuckles turned white. He was a man in his 50s, with graying hair and a face that had seen too much peace, a peace that was now being shattered. On the massive main screen ahead of him, the moon looked different. It was not the familiar, cratered white sphere that had watched over Earth for millions of years. Something was happening on the lunar surface. Massive plumes of gray dust were rising into the vacuum, expanding like dark clouds against the blackness of space. And amidst those clouds, silver ships were moving. "We have confirmed visual contact," Tactical Officer Mike shouted from his station. His fingers flew across his keyboard, trying to make sense of the data. "It's the Vorg fleet, Commander. They are ignoring our patrols. They are going straight for the moon." James narrowed his eyes. The Vorg, a species of spacefaring marauders that had hunted the outer colonies for decades, but they had never dared to come this close to Earth, until now. "Order the defense grid to fire," James said, his voice steady despite the panic rising in his chest. "Target those lead ships. Do not let them breach the orbit." Small sparks of light flashed as Earth's orbital stations launched their missiles. They streaked across the void, tiny specks of fire racing toward the alien armada. For a moment, hope flared on the bridge. But that hope died instantly. The silver Vorg ships didn't even slow down. A purple energy shield rippled around them, and the missiles exploded harmlessly against the barrier. It was like throwing pebbles at a tank. "They are not engaging us," Mike said, his voice shaking slightly. "They are focusing all fire on the moon, on the Sea of Tranquility. Sir, they are trying to dig something up." James watched in horror. The Vorg ships were firing plasma beams straight down into the lunar regolith. The ground on the moon was melting, turning into molten slag. The moon was being carved open like a melon. "Why the moon?" James whispered to himself. "There is nothing there but dust and old flags." Suddenly, the comms channel crackled to life. It was a transmission from the Vorg flagship, broadcasted in every language spoken on Earth. The voice was mechanical and cold, stripping away any attempt at diplomacy. "Earthlings," the voice hissed. "Asterisk, do not interfere. We claim the prize buried within your satellite. Your world is spared for now, but if you fire again, we will turn your planet to glass." Asterisk James slammed his fist onto the console. "I am not letting them blow up our moon without a fight. All ships, advance." The HFYs and the rest of the Earth fleet surged forward, a swarm of metal defiance against the aliens. But the Vorg were prepared. Swarms of smaller alien fighters detached from the main hulls. They moved with a speed that Earth ships couldn't match. They were sleek, jagged things that tore through the human lines. On the screen, James saw the UES Patton, a heavy cruiser, take a direct hit to its reactor. It bloomed into a silent, beautiful flower of fire before vanishing. Hundreds of lives gone in a second. "Commander, our losses are mounting," Mike yelled. "We can't penetrate their shields. We are just flying into a meat grinder." James looked at the strategic map. Earth was outgunned. The Vorg had technology that was centuries ahead of theirs. But he also noticed something strange. The Vorg were protecting a specific crater. As the beams dug deeper, the dust began to glow. A faint blue light was pulsing from beneath the moon's surface. They found what they were looking for. James muttered, "Dot on the moon." The digging stopped. The dust settled, revealing a massive structure that had been buried for eons. It was a spire, made of a black, glassy material that absorbed the light around it. It looked ancient, far older than the Vorg ships. The Vorg ships moved in, attaching cables to the spire, trying to pull it free. "They are trying to salvage it," Mike said, confusion evident in his tone. "Is it a weapon?" Before James could answer, the black spire moved on its own. It didn't need the Vorg's cables. With a shudder that was picked up by the seismic sensors on Earth, the massive structure tore itself free from the lunar rock. It rose into the air, hovering silently above the crater. The Vorg fleet seemed to pause. Then, the alien transmission returned, but this time it was filled with gloating triumph. Asterisk. The machine of the ancients is ours. With this, we will burn the stars. Witness your doom, Earth. Asterisk. James felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. If that thing was a weapon, and the Vorg controlled it, humanity was finished. But then, the unexpected happened. The black spire began to rotate. Intricate symbols lit up along its sides, glowing with a fierce red light. It released a pulse of energy, a shock wave that moved outwards in all directions. The Vorg ships closest to the spire didn't explode. They simply dissolved. The purple shields flickered and died. The hulls of the ships turned to dust, then into gas, vanishing into nothingness. The pulse washed over the moon, sweeping away the alien diggers and the debris in seconds. On the bridge of the Ares, the crew stared at the screen in stunned silence. The alarms had stopped, replaced by the quiet murmurs of disbelief. "What? What just happened?" Mike asked, his eyes wide. James didn't look away from the screen. The black spire was now hovering alone, towering over the silent, dead remains of the Vorg's vanguard. It was active. It was awake. And it was sitting right on Earth's doorstep. Suddenly, every screen on the Ares, every screen on Earth, flickered. The tactical maps, the news feeds, the Vorg communications, everything was replaced by a single symbol. It was a geometric shape, a circle with a triangle inside. Then, a voice filled the bridge. It didn't come from the speakers. It seemed to vibrate inside their skulls. It was deep, resonant, and spoke with a commanding authority that made James stand up straighter. Asterisk. Biological contaminants detected. Asterisk. The voice boomed. Asterisk. Status. Unauthorized presence. Analysis. Reclaiming Creator's homestead. Asterisk. James looked at the black shape on the moon. The Vorg had unleashed something, but they hadn't unleashed a weapon for themselves. They had woken up a guardian. And now, that guardian was looking at Earth. "Sir," Mike whispered, pointing at the readouts. "The energy readings from that machine. They are off the charts. It's powering up a main cannon." James watched as the spire rotated slowly in the void. It wasn't aiming at the retreating Vorg ships. It was aiming at Earth. "Hold steady," James ordered, though fear gripped his heart. "Don't fire. We don't know what it is yet." The voice echoed in their minds again, cold and emotionless. Asterisk. Security breach detected. Initiating sterilization protocols. Asterisk. The weapon on the moon began to glow brighter. The end of the world wasn't coming from the aliens above. It was coming from the moon itself. Humanity had breachers at the gate, but the gatekeeper had just woken up, and it didn't seem to care who was standing in front of it. James clenched his fists. If this was the end, he would go down fighting, but deep down, he knew the real battle had just begun. The aliens had run away in terror, but the humans were left standing in the shadow of a god. And the god was angry. The red glow on the horizon of the moon was visible from Earth even during the day. It looked like a second sunrise, one that promised fire instead of warmth. On the bridge of the UES Ares, the silence was heavier than the gravity holding them in orbit. Commander James stared at the main screen, watching the energy readings climb. The weapon on the moon was charging. "Report," James said, his voice sounding tired. The energy signature is stable, sir, Mike said, his hand shaking slightly over the controls. But it's not like any plasma or laser tech we have ever seen. It feels old. The radiation it's giving off isn't harmful to humans, but our sensors are having a hard time reading it. James turned to look at the officer standing near the tactical map. It was David, a man who looked more like a librarian than a soldier. David wore thick glasses and a civilian jacket that looked out of place among the military uniforms. He was looking at a tablet, his eyes scanning complex data streams. "David," James, sharply. "You told us you know about this. You said the symbols on that spire match the ruins found in the Sahara 50 years ago. Tell me what it is." David looked up, his face pale but his eyes intense. "I told the council, Commander. They thought I was crazy. The ruins weren't alien landing pads. They were bunkers. That machine on the moon isn't an alien weapon. It's a guard post. And it was built by us. Or, to be specific, by our ancestors." Mike laughed nervously. "Us? Humans? Commander, we barely figured out how to put a station on the moon last decade. You expect us to believe we built something like that 1,000,000 years ago?" "Not us," David corrected him gently. "The previous cycle. Humanity has been around longer than we think. We destroyed ourselves, rebuilt, and forgot. The records speak of a great war that drove the survivors to sleep. That machine thinks it's protecting the owners of the house. And right now, it sees us as burglars." James walked to the viewport. "So, it's going to destroy us because we aren't the original tenants?" "Precisely," David nodded. "It said sterilization. It wants to clean the house." Suddenly, the ship's intercom crackled. "Commander, we have a signal from the surface. It's General Miller at the United Nations Defense Center." James tapped the comms button. "Go ahead, General." "Commander, the situation down here is panic." The general's voice sounded stressed. "The Vorg are gone, but the people are terrified of that thing on the moon. We are launching evacuations for the coastal cities, just in case the weapon causes tidal waves. What is your status?" James looked at David, then at the glowing spire on the screen. "We are still here, General, but we have a problem. That machine is targeting Earth. We can't shoot it down. It eats energy. We have to try," the general yelled. "Fire everything we have." "Negative," James said firmly. "If we fire, we might just make it angry faster. We need another way." David stepped forward. "We need to authenticate ourselves. If it has a database of the creators, maybe we can prove we are related. Evolution changes things, but DNA is code. If we can show it our genetic code, maybe it will recognize us." Before James could respond, a loud thud shook the entire ship. It wasn't an explosion. It was a physical impact, like a giant had tapped the ship with a hammer. "Report!" James shouted. "Something just passed through our shields, sir." Mike yelled, typing furiously. "It's a shuttle. A small craft launched from the moon. It's heading straight for Earth." On the screen, a sleek black dart-shaped ship zoomed past the Ares. It moved effortlessly, ignoring the laws of physics. It entered Earth's atmosphere without burning up. "Where is it landing?" James asked. "New York sector," Mike replied. "It's going right for Central Park." David's eyes lit up. "The old world ruins. The original symbols are there. It's going to the archive." James made a decision. "David, get a team. You're going down there. Mike, prepare a shovel for me." "I'm going too." "Sir, that's dangerous." Mike protested. "We are going to die if we do nothing," James said, grabbing his jacket. "I would rather die trying to talk to a machine than sitting here waiting to be vaporized." The scene shifted to the ruins of New York. The city had been rebuilt over the old one, but Central Park remained. It was a crisp afternoon, but the sky was darkened by the looming shape of the moon and the red beam arching into space. People were running, screaming in panic. Police sirens wailed. But in the center of the great lawn, the air shimmered. The black shuttle descended silently, touching the grass with zero impact. The grass didn't even bend under its weight. A ramp lowered. A figure stepped out. It wasn't a little green man. It was a robot, but it looked like a statue of a Greek god brought to life. It was 12 feet tall, made of a dull black metal. It had no face, just a smooth visor-like surface where eyes should be. It held a massive spear in one hand, the tip crackling with blue energy. The National Guard had set up a perimeter around the park. Tanks and soldiers stood ready, their guns aimed at the giant. "Hold your fire," James yelled over the radio as his shuttle landed nearby. He and David ran toward the line of tanks. "Do not shoot." General Miller stood there, looking at the giant. "Commander, that thing is huge. One shot from that spear could take out a city block." "It's here to talk," David said, out of breath. "Let me try." James nodded to David. The young archaeologist walked past the tanks, his hands raised high. He walked slowly toward the giant machine. The machine stood motionless. It didn't look at the soldiers or the tanks. It just looked straight at David. David stopped 10 feet away from it. He took a deep breath and spoke. "We are the children of the colony," he said loud and clear. "We have returned." The machine tilted its head. A beam of light shot from its visor, scanning David from head to toe. David stood frozen, his heart pounding in his ears. The light moved over him, reading his bones, his blood, his very essence. James watched from behind the tanks, his hand on his pistol, ready to fight if things went wrong. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. The people of the city watched from behind windows and barricades. Suddenly, the giant robot lowered its spear. It raised one massive hand and pointed at the ground. The grass in front of David rippled. A hologram projected up from the dirt. It was a rotating double helix structure. DNA. The machine spoke. The voice was not from a speaker, but vibrated in the air itself. It was deep and booming, yet clear. Asterisk. Biological sample analyzed. Genetic match. 98%. Deviation detected. Evolutionary drift. Asterisk. David exhaled, his legs feeling weak. It recognizes us, he whispered back to James. Query, the machine continued. Asterisk. Current status of colonists. Explanation required for security bypass. Asterisk. James stepped forward, joining David. We are not colonists, James said, looking up at the metal giant. We are humanity. We evolved here. We forgot. The machine turned its faceless visor toward James. The blue light on its chest dimmed slightly. Asterisk. Forgotten. Memory loss detected. Determination. Potential threat. If you are the creators, you have fallen into barbarism. Asterisk. We survived, James said firmly. We fought off the Vorg. We are still here. The machine paused. Asterisk. The Vorg. Designation. Parasites. Status. Repelled. Confirm. Asterisk. Yes, James said. We were fighting them when you woke up. The giant robot stood silent for a moment, processing the information. The red glow coming from the moon began to fade slightly. The weapon was powering down. Conflict data received, the machine said. Asterisk. Assistance required. The parasites will return. You are unprepared. This unit is activating defense protocols. Cooperation is mandatory. Asterisk. James and David looked at each other. The machine wasn't going to kill them. It was going to fight for them. But the machine's next words sent a chill down James's spine. Verification incomplete. the machine stated. Asterisk. Current biological forms are weak. To inherit the stars, you must be upgraded. Prepare for integration. Asterisk. With that, the giant robot stomped its foot. A shockwave spread out across the park, knocking soldiers and tanks backward gently. But it didn't hurt them. It felt like a gust of wind. The hologram of the DNA changed. It began to rewrite itself, adding new strands, new codes. David gasped. It's not just defending us, Commander. It wants to change us. It wants to make us into what we used to be. James looked at the giant metal guardian, then back at the sky where the Vorg fleet was regrouping in the distance. If we don't let it, James said grimly, we won't survive the next hour. The battle for Earth had ended, but the fight for humanity's soul was just beginning. The machine had breached the moon, but now it was breaching the very definition of what it meant to be human. The sky above Earth was no longer empty. The Vorg armada, which had retreated to the edge of the solar system to regroup, was back. They moved like a swarm of angry locusts, blocking out the stars. This time, they were not here to dig. They were here to destroy the machine that had humiliated them. If they had to destroy Earth to do it, they would happily burn the planet to ash, on the bridge of the HFY. The lights flickered as the ship's sensors struggled to track the massive number of incoming targets. Commander James stood rigid, watching the tactical map. It was a sea of red dots descending on the blue dot of Earth. They are moving fast, Tactical Officer Mike said, his voice tight. They are targeting the machine's landing site in New York, but they are also firing on our orbital stations. They want to blind us before they strike the surface. Can we hold the line? James asked, already knowing the answer. No, sir, Mike replied. We are down to 40% fighter capability after the first battle. Our shields are failing. If they concentrate fire, they will punch through in 10 minutes. James looked over at David. The archaeologist was sitting at a console, wearing a headset, talking rapidly to the giant robot standing in Central Park. The robot, which David had nicknamed the Sentinel, stood like a statue amidst the trees. Its black armor reflected the fires burning in the city. David, James called out. What is it saying? David took off the headset and looked up, his face pale. It says the Vorg are using a warp dampening field. It cannot teleport to its ship on the moon to retrieve the main weapons. It is stuck here on the ground. It can defend the local area, but it cannot stop the bombardment from space. James cursed under his breath. The Sentinel was powerful, but it was trapped. We need to get it to the moon. If it can connect with the main spire up there, it can activate the planetary shields. The Vorg will shoot down anything that tries to leave the atmosphere, Mike pointed out. James walked to the large window overlooking the hangar bay. Down below, the flight crews were scrambling, preparing the few remaining starfighters for a suicide mission. He saw Captain Tom, his best pilot, climbing into the cockpit of his fighter. Tom looked tired, but his eyes were full of fire. We have to clear a path, James said, turning back to his crew. We have to give the Sentinel a ride. Suddenly, the ship shook violently. Alarms blared. Report. James shouted, grabbing a console to stay upright. Direct hit on the aft hull. The Vorg are launching boarding pods. Mike yelled. They are trying to take the ship. Security teams to the rear decks. James ordered. Mike, get me Tom on the comms. The channel crackled open. Tom here, Commander. My squad is ready. I need you to fly escort for a shuttle, James said. I'm going down to the surface. We are going to pick up our tall friend and bring him home. Roger that, Commander, Tom said. See you in the thick of it. James looked at David. You're coming with me. You're the only one who knows how to talk to that thing. David swallowed hard but nodded. I won't let you down. James and David ran to the hangar bay, The noise was deafening, engines roaring, metal clanging, and the distant thud of explosions against the ship's hull. They jumped into a heavy transport shuttle. The security team on board was led by Chris, a tough soldier with a scarred face. Chris checked his rifle and nodded at James. "Let's go save the world, boss," Chris said. The shuttle launched, lurching out of the Ares into the cold void of space. Immediately, the chaos of battle engulfed them. Green laser fire crisscrossed the darkness. Tom's squadron swooped in, their engines flaring blue. "Stay close, Commander." Tom's voice came over the radio. "We have bogeys on our tail." James watched as two Vorg fighters peeled off and chased Tom. "Break left, Tom. I have a clear shot." James grabbed the shuttle's gun controls and fired. The plasma bolts streaked out, hitting one of the Vorg fighters. It exploded into 1,000 pieces. "Nice shot." Tom cheered. "But more are coming." The shuttle dove into Earth's atmosphere. The heat shield glowed red as they plummeted toward New York. The sky was filled with smoke. On the ground, the Vorg were dropping troops, terrifying mechanical beasts that tore through the streets. "Hold on," Chris yelled as the pilot fought the controls. "This is going to be rough." The shuttle skidded across the grass in Central Park, tearing up the ground before coming to a halt near the Sentinel. The ramp lowered, and James, David, and Chris ran out. The Sentinel stood amidst a crater of burned earth. It had been fighting. Pieces of Vorg drones littered the ground around it. The giant robot turned its headless visor toward them. "We are here to get you to the moon," James shouted over the sound of distant explosions. "We have a shuttle." The Sentinel looked at the small transport. It shook its head slowly. "Insufficient capacity?" it boomed. "Asterisk. This vessel cannot transport this unit." Asterisk. David looked around frantically. He pointed toward the skyline. "What about that?" "The Vorg dropship. It crashed near the museum." "It's big enough." The Sentinel's eyes glowed blue. Asterisk. Acceptable. "But the vessel is damaged." Asterisk. "We can fix it," Chris said. "My team has engineers. We just need to hold this position until they do." As if on cue, a massive Vorg lander descended from the clouds, hovering over the park. It opened its bottom hatch, and hundreds of spider-like aliens poured out, screeching. "Contact front," Chris yelled, opening fire. "Form a perimeter." James drew his pistol and stood shoulder to shoulder with Chris and the security team. The air filled with the sound of gunfire and the hissing of alien blood. The Sentinel stepped forward, raising its energy spear. With a single sweep, it cut through 5 of the spider aliens, slicing them in half. "Go!" James yelled to David. "Get to that crash ship. Get it running." David sprinted toward the crashed Vorg vessel, followed by 2 engineers. James and Chris stayed behind, providing cover fire. The aliens were relentless. They swarmed over the grass, climbing over the burning wreckage of cars. "I'm running low on ammo," Chris shouted, tossing a grenade into the mass of aliens. The explosion threw bodies and metal parts into the air. "Keep pushing," James ordered. He shot an alien that was leaping toward Chris. "We can't let them reach the Sentinel." The Sentinel was a force of nature. It moved with a grace that belied its size. It punched the ground, sending a shockwave that flattened 20 aliens at once. But more were coming. The sky was darkening with more dropships. "Commander," Mike's voice came over the radio, filled with static. "The Ares is taking critical damage. We won't be able to provide air support for much longer." James looked at the sky. The Ares was burning, holes punctured through its hull. It was still fighting, its guns firing defiantly at the Vorg fleet. It was a beautiful, tragic sight. "Don't you give up on us, Mike," James whispered. Then he shouted into the radio, "Tom, Keep those fighters off the ground. We need 5 minutes. Working on it, Commander, Tom replied. But they are endless. Suddenly, a beam of purple energy from a Vorg battleship struck the ground near the park. The shockwave knocked James off his feet. His ears rang. He looked up to see the Sentinel stagger. The giant robot's chest armor was cracked. Blue energy leaked out like blood. The Sentinel knelt on one knee. Critical damage, it announced. Asterisk, mobility reduced. Asterisk, the aliens saw their chance. They surged forward, ignoring the bullets, aiming straight for the wounded machine. No! James yelled. He scrambled to his feet, but there were too many of them. Just then, a roar filled the air. The crashed Vorg dropship, which had been silent, suddenly roared to life. Its engines glowed, lifting its massive bulk off the ground. David was in the cockpit. He had managed to bypass the alien lockout codes. The dropship hovered over the park, its ramp open. The ship's guns, now under David's control, swiveled and fired on the alien swarm, tearing them apart with heavy plasma fire. Get in! James yelled, grabbing Chris by the vest and dragging him toward the ramp. The Sentinel stood up, using its spear for support. It looked at the dropship. Asterisk, pilot skill, adequate. Asterisk, the robot leaped into the air, a massive jump that defied gravity, and landed heavily inside the dropship's cargo bay. The metal floor groaned under the weight. Go, go, go! James screamed into the radio. The pilot of their shuttle fired the thrusters, shooting back up into the sky, while David banked the captured alien ship hard to the right. We have the package, James yelled. Tom, lead the way to the moon. We have a machine to wake up. Below them, Central Park was burning, but the heart of humanity's defense was airborne. The race to the moon had begun. The Vorg fleet swarmed around them, a hurricane of teeth and steel, but James didn't look back. He looked up toward the pale gray orb in the sky. The ancient weapon was waiting. They just had to survive long enough to touch it. The journey from Earth to the moon usually took 3 days. Today, it felt like an eternity compressed into 20 minutes of screaming metal and burning fire. Commander James stood in the cockpit of the shuttle, strapped into his seat, watching the view screen. Outside, the stars were smeared into lines of light by the sheer speed of their ascent. They were flying in formation with David, who was piloting the stolen Vorg dropship. The massive alien ship handled clumsily, tilting left and right, but it was fast. Inside its belly, the giant robot, the Sentinel, was locked down tight. Report. James yelled over the roar of the engines. Shields at 30%. Mike shouted from the comm station. He was coordinating with the remaining Earth forces. The Vorg are swarming us. They know we have the package. As if to prove his point, a cluster of bright green missiles streaked past the shuttle, exploding against the rear hull of David's ship. David, status. James keyed the radio. We are holding. David's voice came back, filled with panic. But the engines are overheating. The Vorg built these ships to scare people, not to fly this fast. Just keep it in the air, James said. Tom, how is the squadron doing? Bad, Commander. Captain Tom's voice was heavy with static. We have lost 3 more birds. The Vorg are targeting us specifically. They are trying to box us in. James looked at the tactical map. The red dots of the enemy were forming a wall between them and the moon. The gray surface of the moon was ahead, but the path was blocked by a wall of Vorg fire. The main spire on the lunar surface was glowing, pulsing with a desperate rhythm, as if it was waiting for its heart to return. We have to punch through, James said. He turned to the pilot. Full power to the forward guns. Mike, target the lead battleship's bridge. We need to make a hole. The The shuttle shuddered as it fired its plasma cannons. Red bolts slammed into a Vorg destroyer, cracking its purple shield. But for every shield they broke, 10 more ships fired back. "Commander, look!" Chris, the security chief, pointed out the window. The Vorg fleet was changing tactics. They stopped firing at the shuttles and instead began to aim their weapons at the moon itself. Massive beams of energy struck the lunar surface, kicking up massive clouds of dust and rock. They were trying to destroy the spire before the Sentinel could reach it. "They are going to bury it." James slammed his fist on the console. "We are too late." "Not yet," a deep voice said from the shuttle speaker. It was the Sentinel dot inside the stolen dropship. The black robot stood up. It walked to the open cargo ramp, the wind of the upper atmosphere rushing past it. Asterisk, initiating remote uplink. Preparing for broadcast. Asterisk, what is it doing? Mike asked. The Sentinel raised its spear. A blue light erupted from the tip, brighter than a star. The light didn't hit the Vorg ships. It expanded outward, washing over the shuttle, over David's ship, and over Tom's fighter squadron. Suddenly, James felt a tingle in his mind. It was like a sudden rush of clarity. He looked at the radar screen and saw everything differently. He could see the weak points in the Vorg shields. He could predict their movements. "Mike," James said, his voice strangely calm, "fire at the second coordinate on your screen. Trust me." Mike hesitated for a split second, then tapped the keys. The shuttle's main cannon fired, hitting a small, unarmored spot on a Vorg cruiser. The ship didn't just explode. It broke in half. "I see it," Tom's voice shouted over the radio. "The Sentinel is showing us where to shoot. It's linking with our targeting computers." "It's more than that," David said, his voice filled with wonder. "It's interfacing with the ships. It's upgrading us." The Hughes Ares, which had been limping behind them with smoking engines, suddenly surged forward. Its shields flared, not blue, but the same bright blue as the Sentinel's energy. The ship's main guns fired a new type of beam one that cut through the Vorg armada like a hot knife through butter. "The Ares is back online," Mike cheered. "Admiral James must be seeing the same thing we are." James watched as the battle turned. The human ships were moving in perfect unison, guided by the ancient intelligence of the Sentinel. They were dodging attacks before the Vorg even fired them. It was a dance of death, and humanity was finally leading. But the Vorg commander was not finished. The largest Vorg ship, a dreadnought the size of a city, broke formation. It ignored the human ships and aimed directly at the stolen dropship carrying the Sentinel. "David, evasive maneuvers," James yelled. "I can't," David cried out. "They have a tractor beam on us." A green beam latched onto the dropship, dragging it backward. The Sentinel slid toward the edge of the ramp. It grabbed onto a safety rail, its metal fingers groaning under the strain. "They are trying to capture him," Chris said, readying his rifle. "We have to shoot the emitter." "We are too far." James watched in horror. The dropship was being pulled into the hangar bay of the massive dreadnought. If they got inside, the Vorg would dissect the Sentinel and learn its secrets. "Tom, cover me." James unbuckled his seatbelt. "Pilot, get us alongside that dropship." "Commander, you will be spaced," Mike yelled. "We are out of time." James ran to the airlock. He put on his space helmet and sealed his suit. "Chris, you with me?" Chris nodded, putting on his own helmet. "Always." The side door of the shuttle opened. The void of space stared back at them. James used his magnetic boots to walk onto the hull. The Hughes Ares flew above them, providing cover fire, shielding them from the worst of the enemy lasers. James and Chris jumped across the gap between the shuttle and the trapped dropship. They landed hard on the alien hull. Chris used a plasma cutter to slice through the locking mechanism of the tractor beam emitter. Sparks flew into the vacuum. "Come on, come on," James yelled over the radio dot inside the dropship. The Sentinel pulled itself up. It looked at James through the open hatch. The robot's eyes glowed with a fierce intensity. "Connection stabilized," the Sentinel said. Asterisk, stand clear. Asterisk, James and Chris pushed off the hull, firing their thrusters to get back to the shuttle. The Sentinel stood at the edge of the dropship's ramp. It pointed its spear at the dreadnought, pulling them in. A beam of pure white light shot out. It didn't explode. It disintegrated the entire front section of the dreadnought. The tractor beam cut off instantly. The dropship shot free. "Hold on," David yelled as he regained control. "We are heading for the moon." The Vorg fleet was in chaos. Their command ship was destroyed, and the humans were fighting with impossible skill. But there were still thousands of them. "We are entering lunar orbit," Mike said. "But the Spire is taking heavy damage." James looked at the screen. The Vorg were bombarding the black spire on the moon. The ancient stone was cracking. The blue light flickering inside was dimming. "The spire is the key," David said. "The Sentinel has to merge with the mainframe." "We aren't going to make it," Tom's voice came through. "There are too many fighters between us and the landing zone." James looked at the Sentinel on the screen. "Can you hear me?" Asterisk. "Yes, Commander James." Asterisk. "Do it," James said. "Whatever you did to the ships, do it to the moon." The Sentinel raised its hand. A pulse of energy shot out from the dropship. It raced ahead of them, striking the lunar surface. The dust around the spire flew away. A shield, massive and shimmering, snapped into existence over the entire Sea of Tranquility. The Vorg bombardment hit the shield and splashed harmlessly. "Tom, clear a path to the spire," James ordered. "With pleasure." Tom's squadron dove, their guns blazing, creating a tunnel through the enemy formation. David dropped the shuttle toward the lunar surface. The gravity was low, making the landing feel light and bumpy. They touched down right next to the black spire. The ramp lowered. The Sentinel didn't walk out. It ran. It moved with incredible speed for such a large machine. It reached the base of the spire and placed its hands on the ancient symbols. Activating, the Sentinel boomed. Reclaiming the homestead. The ground shook. Cracks of blue light shot out from the spire, running across the lunar surface like veins. The beam that had been charging in Part 1, the one meant for Earth, suddenly reversed. It pulled energy from the stars, from the void, channeling it into the machine. The sky above the moon turned from black to a brilliant, shining blue. The shield expanded. It grew larger and larger, pushing past the moon, encasing the UESRs, the shuttles, and pushing the Vorg fleet away. "The shield is pushing them back," Mike laughed. "Look at them run." The Vorg ships were being shoved by the sheer force of the energy field. Their formations broke. They were helpless against the power of the ancient machine. James stood at the bottom of the shuttle ramp, his feet crunching on the gray lunar dust. He watched as the Sentinel merged with the spire, becoming one with the moon. The human race had been seconds away from extinction. Now they were untouchable. "We did it," Chris said, patting James on the back. "We actually did it." James looked up at the Earth, hanging in the sky like a marble. "Not yet," he said softly. "We survived. But the war isn't over until we say it is." The silence that followed the battle was heavier than the noise of the guns. On the gray surface of the moon, the dust was slowly settling. The massive blue shield that had pushed the Vorg fleet away shimmered like a soap bubble in the sunlight. It encased the entire moon, protecting the ancient machine that now hummed with life. Commander James stood on the lunar surface, his boots leaving deep prints in the regolith. The air in his suit smelled recycled and stale, but he didn't care. He was alive. Around him, the crew of the shuttle, David, Chris, and the others were gathered near the base of the giant black spire. The Sentinel was gone. It had physically dissolved into the structure, merging its consciousness with the moon's ancient systems. "Is it over?" David asked, looking at the towering black crystal. He touched a small datapad in his hand, reading the streaming numbers. "The Vorg fleet has retreated past Jupiter. They are running." "Let them run," Chris said, leaning on his rifle. He looked tired, his face smeared with dirt and sweat. "They won't come back in a hurry. Not after what this thing did to them." James looked up at the sky. The earth was beautiful, a blue and white marble floating in the blackness. It looked peaceful, but he knew that down there, billions of people were terrified. The cities were damaged, the fleets were broken, and the world had changed forever. "Commander," Mike's voice crackled over the radio. "Admiral James is on the line from the UES. He wants to know the status of the machine." James tapped his helmet. "Go ahead, Admiral." "The shield is holding," the Admiral said, his voice sounding older and weary. "The energy readings are stable." "James, what did we find?" "Is it a weapon?" James looked at the spire. It was pulsing with a soft, rhythmic light now. "It's a Guardian, sir. It was built by humans from a long time ago. They left it here to wait for us to grow up, and it thinks we are ready." "Ready for what?" the Admiral asked. "Ready for the upgrade," David said, stepping closer to James so the Admiral could hear him over the open channel. "The machine is broadcasting a data packet. It's massive. It contains blueprints for starship engines, power generators, medical technology, things we couldn't even dream of." There was a long pause on the radio. "You mean to tell me," the Admiral said slowly, "that we just inherited an empire?" "I think we just inherited the keys to the galaxy," James replied. Suddenly, the ground beneath them glowed. A hologram projected into the air above the spire. It was a star map. Thousands of stars were highlighted in red. "Access denied," the deep voice of the machine echoed in their helmets. It was no longer the Sentinel speaking, but the combined intelligence of the lunar fortress. Asterisk. "These systems are locked. Security level insufficient." Asterisk. David typed furiously on his pad. "It's locked us out." "The technology is there, but we can't use it yet." "Why?" James asked the machine. Asterisk. "We defeated the Vorg. We proved ourselves." Asterisk. Asterisk. "Proven combat capability." Asterisk. The machine responded. Asterisk. "Not proven. Wisdom. The creators lock the advanced weapons to prevent their children from destroying themselves again. To unlock the Level 5 protocols, you must demonstrate unity." Asterisk. "Unity?" Chris scoffed. "We just fought together to save the planet. Isn't that unity?" "Current status. Fragmented," the machine said. Asterisk. "Your species is divided. You fight over land, over resources, over beliefs. Until you stand as one planet, one people, the full power of this fortress will remain dormant. You have shields. You have basic tools. The rest must be earned." Asterisk. James looked at the Earth again. The machine was right. Even with an alien invasion, he knew there were governments down there already arguing about who owned the moon, who controlled the machine. "So, it's a test," James said. "Correct," the machine replied. Asterisk. "Pass the test, and you will inherit the stars. Fail, and you will remain on Earth until you destroy yourselves or another species destroys you for you." Asterisk. The hologram faded. The ground stopped glowing. The message was clear.